My parents canceled my medical school graduation party because my sister wanted to go to Lollapalooza. So I went my own way. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you something that changed my life forever. It happened on what should have been the most triumphant moment of my 22 years, the day I got accepted to Harvard Medical School. I'd been dreaming of becoming a doctor since I was 10 years old, when my grandmother died in a hospital where the staff seemed overwhelmed and understaffed. I promised myself I'd become the kind of doctor who would never let someone feel alone and scared in their final moments. That promise became my driving force through everything that followed. 12 years of relentless studying, volunteering at children's hospitals, shadowing physicians, maintaining a perfect GPA through high school, and 4 years of undergraduate pre-med courses at Northwestern had led to this moment. The thick envelope from Harvard Medical School sat on my desk, and my hand shook as I opened it. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into Harvard Medical School's incoming class of 2019. Your academic excellence and demonstrated commitment to medicine make you an ideal candidate for our program. I actually screamed with joy, then ran downstairs to find my parents and share the most important news of my life. Mom, Dad, I got into Harvard Medical School. My parents were in the kitchen, Dad reading the Sunday paper with his coffee, Mom unloading the dishwasher in her bathrobe. They looked up with what I can only describe as polite interest, the kind of expression you'd give someone who told you they'd found a parking spot at the mall. That's nice, sweetheart, Mom said, not even turning around fully. Congratulations. Nice? I stared at her, clutching the acceptance letter. Mom, this is Harvard Medical School. Do you understand what this means? I'm going to be a doctor. I could specialize in pediatric surgery, maybe save children's lives. Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and gave me a brief nod. We're proud of you. You always were the ambitious one. I waited for more. A hug. Excitement. Some recognition that their daughter had just achieved something extraordinary that would change not only my life, but potentially the lives of countless patients I would treat. Instead, they seemed to be waiting for me to leave so they could return to their leisurely Sunday morning routine. The silence stretched awkwardly until my older sister Mia walked into the kitchen, stretching and yawning in her silk pajamas. It was 11:30 a.m., early for her on a weekend. What's all the noise about? She mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. Sarah got into medical school, Mom said, and suddenly there was more animation in her voice than she'd shown for my news. Harvard, no less. Cool, Mia said without looking up from adding sugar to her coffee. She scrolled through her phone with one hand while stirring with the other. Hey, speaking of school and stuff, I've been meaning to talk to you guys. All my friends are going to Lollapalooza this summer, and I really want to go too. And just like that, the conversation shifted entirely away from my acceptance to Harvard Medical School and toward Mia's social calendar. Lollapalooza? Dad perked up with interest I hadn't seen when I'd shared my news. That's the music festival in Chicago, right? Yeah. It's going to be amazing. Billie Eilish is headlining, and 21 Pilots, and like 50 other incredible artists. All my friends have been planning this for months. Mom set down her coffee mug and gave Mia her full attention. How much would something like that cost? Well, the tickets are like $400 each, and then we'd need to get a hotel room and food and transportation. I've been doing research, and I think I could do the whole trip for maybe $8,000. That includes some new clothes because I literally have nothing appropriate to wear to a music festival. I stood there holding my Harvard acceptance letter, watching my parents lean in with interest as Mia outlined her vacation plans. The contrast was so stark, it felt surreal. $8,000, Dad mused. That is expensive, but it sounds like an important experience. You've been having a tough time lately with everything. Exactly. Mia's face lit up. I've been so stressed about figuring out what I want to do with my life, and all my friends are moving forward with their plans, and I just feel so left behind. This could be exactly what I need to clear my head and get some perspective. I cleared my throat. Actually, speaking of plans and expenses, and I need to talk to you guys about Harvard costs. 3 faces turned toward me with varying degrees of annoyance at the interruption. I've been researching everything I need for Harvard, I continued, trying to match their energy for Mia's festival plans. The first year alone will cost $65,000. Tuition, housing, books, living expenses, medical equipment, lab fees. I'll need about $25,000 upfront just to get started and secure housing. The mood in the kitchen shifted immediately. Dad's interested expression faded, and Mom started wiping down counters that were already clean. $25,000? Dad's voice was flat. That's a tremendous amount of money, Sarah. I know it sounds like a lot, but this is Harvard Medical School. It's an investment in my future. I'll be able to pay you back once I'm established as a physician. Doctors make excellent salaries, and I'll never forget that you made this possible for me." Mom and Dad exchanged one of their wordless looks, the kind married couples develop over decades together. I'd seen this look before, usually when I asked for things like new school clothes or money for extracurricular activities. "We'll have to think about it," Mom said, her voice carefully neutral. "Money's been tight with your father's reduced hours at the plant." "I understand completely," I said quickly, not wanting to seem pushy or ungrateful. "I don't need it all at once. Maybe you could help with the housing deposit now. That's the most urgent part. And then we could work out monthly payments for living expenses." I'm also applying for additional scholarships and looking into work-study programs. "We said we'll think about it." Dad's voice carried a note of finality that I recognized. It meant the conversation was over, whether I was satisfied with the outcome or not. Mia, who had been scrolling through her phone during this exchange, looked up with excitement. "Oh my God, you guys, look at this!" Taylor posted photos from last year's Lollapalooza, and it looks absolutely incredible. "Look at these outfits." She shoved her phone toward our parents, who immediately crowded around to look at the pictures. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed music festival fashion, which artists Mia was most excited to see, and whether she should get a hotel room or try to stay with friends. I eventually excused myself and went to my room, still holding my Harvard acceptance letter. Over the next week, I threw myself into researching every possible way to fund my medical school education. I applied for additional scholarships, looked into private student loans, and calculated exactly how many hours I'd need to work at my part-time job at the local clinic to save the money myself. The math was daunting. Even working full-time over the summer, I could maybe save $4,000 or $5,000. The remaining $20,000 would have to come from loans with interest rates that would leave me drowning in debt for decades. Meanwhile, Mia's Lollapalooza plans dominated every family conversation. She researched hotels, created Pinterest boards of festival outfits, and made detailed schedules of which artists she wanted to see on which stages. My parents were completely invested in her planning process, offering suggestions and showing genuine excitement for her upcoming adventure. "You know what?" Mom said during dinner one evening. "We should make this a real celebration for Mia. Maybe get her some new festival clothes, a good camera to document everything, maybe even upgrade her hotel situation." "That's such a sweet idea," Mia gushed. "I've been looking at this amazing boutique hotel that's walking distance from Grant Park. It's more expensive than the hostels, but it would make the whole experience so much more comfortable." I pushed food around my plate, listening to them plan what was essentially a luxury vacation for my sister, while my own future hung in limbo. That Friday evening, a week and a half after my acceptance letter had arrived, my parents called me into the living room. They sat together on the couch, wearing the serious expressions that usually preceded discussions about grades or household rules. "Sarah, we've been talking about your Harvard situation," Dad began, his tone formal and uncomfortable. My heart started racing. This was it. They'd figured out the finances, maybe talked to the bank about a loan, or decided to dip into their savings account. They were going to help me pursue my dreams. "We've given it a lot of thought, and we've decided we can't afford to help you with medical school right now," Mom continued, delivering the words like she was ripping off a bandage. $25,000 is just too much for us to manage with everything else going on." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The room seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the arm of my chair to steady myself. "But this is my future," I managed to say. "This is everything I've worked for my entire life." "We know, and we're genuinely sorry," Dad said, though his voice lacked any real emotion. "But maybe you could defer for a year? Take a gap year? Work full-time? Save up some money? Harvard will still be there next year." "Dad, medical school doesn't work like that. If I defer my acceptance, there's no guarantee they'll hold my spot for next year's class. The admissions process is incredibly competitive. Thousands of qualified applicants get rejected every year. This might be my only chance." Mom leaned forward with what she probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "Honey, if you're really meant to be a doctor, another opportunity will come along. And maybe by then we'll be in a better financial position to help. Or maybe I could take out student loans," I suggested desperately. "You wouldn't have to give me the money, you could just co-sign for loans and I'll pay them back myself once I'm working." "We're not comfortable taking on that kind of debt obligation," Dad said firmly. $25,000 is more than we make in several months." That's when Mia walked into the room, practically bouncing with excitement. "Hey, did you guys make a decision about Lollapalooza yet? Because tickets are selling out fast, and if I don't buy them soon, I'll be totally screwed. All my friends already have theirs." I watched in horrified fascination as my parents' expressions immediately brightened. Actually, Mom said, turning to Mia with a warm smile, your father and I were just discussing that. We think this festival could be really good for you. We've decided we can help you with the costs, Dad added, and his voice carried an enthusiasm that had been completely absent when discussing my medical school dreams. Really? Mia squealed, clapping her hands together. Oh my God, really? You'll help me go to Lollapalooza. We think it's important for young people to have these kinds of experiences, Mom said. You've been going through a difficult time, trying to figure out your next steps, and maybe this is exactly what you need to gain some clarity and confidence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brain struggled to process the cognitive dissonance of what was happening in front of me. Wait, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't afford to help me go to medical school, but you can afford to send her to a music festival? The enthusiasm drained from their faces as they remembered I was still in the room. That's different, Sarah, Mom said, though she couldn't seem to articulate how. Different how? You just told me $25,000 is more than you make in several months, and that's too much debt for the family to take on. But $8,000 for a vacation is reasonable? Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mia's situation is more immediate. She's struggling right now, and this could really help her mental state. And my education isn't important for my mental state? My future career isn't worth investing in? Don't be dramatic, Mom said, her voice taking on an edge. You're a smart, capable girl. You'll figure something out, you always do. Mia, meanwhile, had been jumping up and down and hugging both parents, apparently oblivious to the broader conversation happening around her celebration. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she was saying. This is going to be the best summer ever. I can't wait to tell everyone. How? I asked, still trying to understand the logic. How will I figure it out? I'm 22 years old. I have maybe $4,000 in savings from my part-time job, and I need $21,000 more to start medical school in 4 months. Where exactly do you think I'm going to get that money? Student loans, Dad suggested. Work-study programs, scholarships. There are lots of options for students in your situation. I already applied for every scholarship I qualify for. I already looked into work-study. The student loans available to me have terrible interest rates, and I'd graduate with so much debt I'd be paying it off until I'm 50 years old. Well, maybe that's just the reality of medical school, Mom said. Most doctors have student loan debt. It's part of the profession. I stared at her. So your solution is for me to go into crushing debt because you'd rather spend money on Mia's vacation than invest in my education? We're not spending money on Mia's vacation, Dad corrected. We're supporting our daughter through a difficult transition period in her life. And what about my transition period? I'm starting medical school. I'm beginning the journey to become a doctor, to save lives, to make a meaningful contribution to society. Doesn't that deserve support too? The room fell silent except for Mia, who was still on her phone, probably already posting about Lollapalooza on social media. You don't understand, Sarah, Mom finally said. Mia needs this more than you need our help with school. You're strong and independent. You'll find a way because that's who you are. But Mia needs our support right now. I felt something break inside me. Something that had been cracking for years but finally shattered completely in that moment. I need support too, I said quietly. I've always needed support. But because I didn't scream and cry and make demands the way Mia does, you assumed I didn't need anything from you. That's not true, Dad protested. But his voice lacked conviction. It is true. When I made honor roll every semester, you said, that's nice, and went back to whatever you were doing. When Mia passed a single class, you took her out to dinner to celebrate. When I won the science fair, you couldn't make it to the award ceremony because you were helping Mia with some crisis. When I got perfect SAT scores, you mentioned it once and then forgot about it. I stood up, suddenly feeling exhausted. I'm going to become a doctor, I said with more confidence than I felt, with or without your help. But I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that when your daughter achieved something extraordinary, something that would change her life and potentially save other people's lives, you chose to invest in a music festival instead. Mia finally looked up from her phone. Why are you being so dramatic? It's just school. There will be other opportunities. I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. She was 22 years old, living at home, working part-time at a retail job when she felt like it, spending her days shopping and hanging out with friends. She had never shown interest in any particular career, never pursued any meaningful goals, never demonstrated any real ambition beyond her next social event. And my parents thought her entertainment was more important than my life's calling. You're right, Mia, I said finally. This is just school. Just like everything else I've ever cared about is just something. Just honor roll, just perfect attendance, just volunteering at the children's hospital, just getting into Harvard Medical School. All of it is just whatever, right? I headed toward the stairs, then turned back for one final observation. I hope you have an amazing time at Lollapalooza. I really do. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be. And I hope you remember it forever. Because it cost more than my parents were willing to invest in my future. That night, I sat in my room with my laptop, crying as I researched private student loans and tried to figure out how to make my dreams happen without any family support. The interest rates were crushing, and even with the best-case scenario, I'd graduate with over $100,000 in debt. But as I worked through the financial calculations, something else was happening. My sadness was transforming into something harder and more determined. If my parents weren't going to invest in my future, I'd find people who would. The next morning, I called my best friend Emma and told her everything that had happened. I can't believe they did that to you, she said, her voice filled with the outrage my own parents should have felt on my behalf. Sarah, you've wanted to be a doctor since we were 10 years old. Your whole life has been leading to this moment. I know. I just don't understand how they can see my dreams as optional but Mia's entertainment as essential. What are you going to do? I honestly don't know. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should defer and try to save money for a year. No. Emma's voice was fierce. Absolutely not. You're not giving up your dreams because your parents have screwed up priorities. Can you hold on? I want to talk to my parents about this. An hour later, Emma called me back. My parents want to see you, she said. Can you come over for dinner tonight? They have an idea. That evening, I sat in Emma's family's dining room, feeling nervous and embarrassed as I explained my situation to her parents. Dr. and Mrs. Peterson. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Dr. Peterson said after I'd finished my story. You were accepted to Harvard Medical School. You need $15,000 to get started, and your parents refused to help because they'd rather spend $8,000 on your sister's vacation? I nodded, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. There's nothing shameful about this situation, Mrs. Peterson said gently, apparently reading my expression. The shame belongs entirely to your parents. We've watched you grow up, Dr. Peterson continued. We've seen your dedication, your compassion, your absolute commitment to becoming a physician. Emma has told us about your volunteer work at the children's hospital, your perfect grades, your maturity and drive. You're exactly the kind of person who should be a doctor. Thank you, I whispered. So here's what we propose, Mrs. Peterson said. We want to invest in your future. I looked up in surprise. We'll loan you the $25,000 you need, Dr. Peterson explained. Not as charity, but as an investment. We'll set up a formal loan agreement with reasonable interest rates. Much better than anything you'd get from a bank. You can pay us back once you're established in your career. I started crying. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Mrs. Peterson smiled. We're offering. We believe in you, and we want to be part of helping you achieve something extraordinary. But why? Why would you invest in me when my own parents won't? Dr. Peterson and his wife exchanged a look. Because we recognize potential when we see it, he said. Because we understand that helping young people pursue their dreams is one of the most important things adults can do. And because we know that $25,000 invested in your education today will come back to the world 1,000-fold through all the lives you'll save as a physician. That night, I went home with a signed loan agreement and a check that would cover my Harvard expenses. I also went home with something even more valuable. The knowledge that there were adults in the world who saw my worth and were willing to invest in my future. I didn't tell my parents about the Petersons' loan immediately. Instead, I spent the next few days watching my family's dynamics with new clarity. Mia spent hours each day shopping for festival clothes, researching Chicago restaurants, and coordinating with her friends. My parents were completely invested in every detail of her planning process. They drove her to specialty stores to find the perfect boots, helped her research which hotels had the best rooftop pools, and listened with fascination as she described which artists she was most excited to see. Meanwhile, my acceptance to Harvard Medical School had become old news. When relatives called to congratulate me, my parents would say things like, "Yes, Sarah got into some medical school," with no enthusiasm or pride in their voices. The contrast was so stark it would have been comical if it weren't so painful. A week later, I was having dinner with my family when I decided to share my news. "I have an update about Harvard," I announced, setting down my fork. My parents looked up with mild interest. "I've secured the funding I need for medical school," I said. "I'll be starting in the fall as planned." Dad's eyebrows went up. "Really? You got additional scholarship money? No. Emma's family loaned me the money I need. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You went behind our backs and borrowed money from neighbors? Mom's voice was sharp with disapproval. I went to people who believed in my future when my own family didn't. That's not fair, Sarah, Dad said. We explained our financial situation. You explained that you couldn't afford to invest $25,000 in my medical education, but you could afford to spend $8,000 on Mia's entertainment. I understood your priorities perfectly. Mia looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through Instagram during dinner. Why are you making such a big deal about this? She asked. It's just money, and it's just school. There are lots of doctors in the world already. I stared at my sister, marveling at her complete inability to understand what medical school meant to me, or why her parents' choice might have been hurtful. You're right, I said finally. It is just money, and you're about to spend $8,000 of it on a weekend of partying while I work 3 jobs during medical school to pay back the loan that should have been unnecessary. Don't be so dramatic, Mom sighed. The Petersons are wealthy. $15,000 is nothing to them. It's not about their wealth, I said. It's about their values. They saw potential in me and chose to invest in it. You saw the same potential and chose to ignore it. I stood up from the table, suddenly having no appetite for dinner or family conversation. I want you all to remember this, I said, looking around the table at each of them. When I'm a doctor, when I'm saving lives, when I'm making a difference in the world, remember that it happened without your support. Remember that you had the chance to be part of something meaningful, and you chose festival tickets instead. The next morning, I started packing for Harvard. I had 3 months to get ready, and I was determined to make the most of my opportunity. Emma came over to help me sort through my belongings, deciding what to take to Boston and what to leave behind. Are you nervous? She asked as we folded clothes. Terrified, I admitted, but also excited. This is everything I've dreamed of. Your parents are idiots, she said matter-of-factly. I hope you know that. I'm starting to realize it. Over the next few weeks, as I prepared for the biggest transition of my life, my parents seemed more focused on Mia's festival preparations than my departure for medical school. They spent hours helping her choose outfits, researching Chicago attractions, and planning her travel itinerary. Meanwhile, I was left to navigate college preparation on my own, finding housing, registering for classes, buying textbooks, arranging transportation to Boston. When I asked for help with practical matters like setting up a bank account near campus or figuring out health insurance, they seemed annoyed by the interruption to their Lollapalooza planning sessions. The night before I left for Harvard, I packed my car with everything I owned. My parents were in the living room with Mia, looking at photos of previous year's festivals on her laptop. I'm leaving early tomorrow morning, I announced from the doorway. Drive safely, Mom said without looking up from the computer screen. Call when you get there, Dad added absently. That was it. No emotional goodbye, no words of encouragement, no acknowledgement that their youngest daughter was leaving home to pursue her dreams. They were too busy helping Mia plan her vacation to properly send me off to medical school. The next morning, I loaded the last of my belongings into my car as the sun came up. My parents were still asleep, and Mia was probably still scrolling through social media on her phone. Just as I was about to drive away, Emma and her parents appeared in their pajamas and robes. We couldn't let you leave without a proper goodbye, Mrs. Peterson said, hugging me tightly. Make us proud, Dr. Peterson added, though I know you will. Emma handed me a care package filled with homemade cookies, tea bags, and a photo of us from graduation. Text me every day, she said. I want to hear about everything. Standing in my driveway at 6 a.m., surrounded by people who weren't related to me but who cared more about my future than my own family did, I felt a mix of sadness and gratitude that would stay with me for years. As I drove toward Boston and the beginning of my medical career, I thought about the choice my parents had made. They'd chosen to invest in temporary happiness over permanent achievement, in entertainment over education, in my sister's immediate gratification over my lifelong dreams. It was a choice that would define our relationship for the rest of our lives, though I didn't fully understand that yet. Harvard Medical School was everything I'd dreamed it would be and infinitely harder than I'd imagined. The coursework was brutal, the competition fierce, and the pressure relentless. But every morning when I walked into those lecture halls, I remembered why I was there and who had made it possible. I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover my living expenses and started paying back the Petersons immediately, even though they'd told me to wait until after graduation. I tutored undergraduate pre-med students, worked nights at a medical supply company, and spent weekends doing data entry for research labs. My days started at 5 a.m. and ended well after midnight. I had no social life, no time for relaxation, no money for anything beyond basic necessities. While my classmates went out for dinners and weekend trips, I was either studying or working, but I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I'd always wanted to do. Meanwhile, social media kept me updated on my family's activities, whether I wanted to see them or not. Mia's Lollapalooza posts filled my Instagram feed. Photos of her and her friends in designer festival outfits, expensive meals in Chicago, poolside shots from their boutique hotel. My parents liked and commented on every single post, celebrating her amazing adventure and expressing how proud they were that she was having such wonderful experiences. I don't think they ever liked or commented on any of the study abroad posts Emma shared, or the photos of me in my medical school scrubs during clinical rotations, or the pictures from my volunteer work at Boston Children's Hospital. Actually, I'm not sure they even followed my social media accounts. By the end of my first year, I'd made the dean's list and been accepted into a competitive research program. When I called home to share the news, the conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. "That's great, honey," Mom said. "How are your grades?" "I just told you, I made the dean's list. That means I'm in the top 10% of my class." "Oh, that's nice. Hold on, Mia wants to tell you about her new job." Mia had gotten hired as a sales associate at a boutique clothing store, working about 20 hours a week when she felt like it. "Sarah, guess what? I got that job at Bella's boutique. I get to work with clothes all day, and I get a discount on everything. It's like the perfect job for me." My parents were more excited about Mia's part-time retail position than they'd been about my acceptance into one of the world's most prestigious medical schools. After that phone call, I started calling home less frequently. By the middle of my second year, our communication had dwindled to brief conversations every few weeks. And even those felt forced and artificial. I was too busy anyway, between coursework, clinical rotations, research projects, and my multiple jobs. I was learning to perform physical exams, diagnose diseases, interpret lab results, and work with patients. I was becoming the doctor I'd always dreamed of being. During my third-year clinical rotations, I discovered my passion for pediatric surgery. Working with sick children and their families, I felt like I'd found my calling within my calling. These tiny patients, fighting for their lives with such courage and resilience, reminded me every day why I'd wanted to become a doctor. I was particularly drawn to cardiac surgery, the intricate work of repairing children's hearts, giving them the chance at normal, healthy lives. It was challenging, demanding work that required absolute precision and years of additional training, but I knew it was my path. By my fourth year, I was being recruited by top residency programs across the country. My research had been published in respected medical journals, my clinical evaluations were outstanding, and my professors were writing glowing recommendation letters. When I matched into a surgical residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, one of the most competitive programs in the country, I called home to share the news. "Chicago," Mom said. "That's nice. You'll be close to home again." "This is a huge accomplishment," I tried to explain. "Northwestern has one of the best surgery programs in the world. Matching there is incredibly competitive." "That's wonderful, dear. Your father and I are proud of you." But their voices lacked any real enthusiasm or understanding of what I'd achieved. Meanwhile, Mia had gotten engaged to her boyfriend of 6 months, a guy she'd met at a bar who worked construction when he could find jobs. My parents were over the moon about the engagement, already planning an elaborate wedding and talking about grandchildren. The contrast in their reactions told me everything I needed to know about their values and priorities. Medical school graduation came and went with little fanfare from my family. My parents attended the ceremony but seemed more interested in when it would be over so they could get back home. Emma and her parents flew in from our hometown, bringing flowers and taking dozens of photos. They treated my graduation like the major life milestone it was. After the ceremony, we all went to dinner at a nice restaurant near campus. "We're so proud of you," Mrs. Peterson said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Dr. Sarah Williams has a nice ring to it." My parents smiled politely but didn't seem to fully grasp what I'd accomplished or what lay ahead. "So what's next?" Dad asked. "More school?" "Residency," I explained. 5 years of surgical training in Chicago, then potentially a fellowship in pediatric cardiac surgery. "More training?" Mom sighed. "When do you actually start working as a real doctor?" I tried not to let their lack of understanding hurt me, but it did. They saw my medical career as an endless series of educational hoops to jump through rather than the systematic progression toward expertise that would allow me to save lives. Surgical residency was the most demanding experience of my life. I worked 80 to 100 hours per week, taking call every third or fourth night. learning to operate under extreme pressure while chronically sleep-deprived. But I loved it. Every procedure I assisted with, every surgery I performed under supervision, every patient whose life I helped save, it all reinforced my sense of purpose and belonging. By my second year of residency, I was already being noticed by the attendings for my skill and dedication. My hands were steady, my judgment sound, my bedside manner compassionate but professional. "You have real talent for this," Dr. Rodriguez, the chief of cardiac surgery, told me after I'd assisted on a particularly complex procedure. "Have you thought about specializing in pediatric cardiac surgery?" "It's all I think about," I admitted. "Good. I think you'd be exceptional at it." During my residency, I lost touch with my family almost entirely. I was working such long hours that I barely had time for essential activities like eating and sleeping, let alone maintaining relationships with people who had never really supported my dreams. I heard updates through Emma, whose parents still lived in our hometown. Mia had gotten married in an expensive wedding that my parents had somehow managed to pay for. She'd had her first child a year later, then 2 more in quick succession. She and her husband lived in my parents' basement with their 3 kids, none of them working steadily. My parents, meanwhile, had never asked about my residency, my surgical training, or my career plans. By my 4th year of residency, I was performing complex surgeries with minimal supervision. I'd published research on innovative surgical techniques, presented at national conferences, and been recruited by pediatric cardiac surgery fellowships at top children's hospitals. I chose to do my fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital, one of the world's premier pediatric cardiac surgery programs. The work was incredibly demanding but deeply fulfilling, operating on tiny hearts, correcting congenital defects, giving children the chance at normal lives. During my fellowship, I developed expertise in some of the most complex pediatric cardiac procedures. I was working with cases that many surgeons would consider inoperable, using cutting-edge techniques to repair hearts that other programs had given up on. My reputation in the field was growing. I was invited to speak at conferences, consulted on difficult cases from other hospitals, and recruited by children's hospitals across the country. When I finished my fellowship and was offered a position as an attending pediatric cardiac surgeon at Chicago Children's Hospital, I was 35 years old and finally ready to practice independently as the kind of doctor I'd dreamed of becoming. The salary was more money than I'd ever imagined making, enough to pay off my student loans within a few years, buy a beautiful condo overlooking Lake Michigan, and finally live comfortably while doing work I was passionate about. For the first time since leaving for college, I wasn't working multiple jobs, wasn't stressed about money, wasn't exhausted from trying to balance impossible demands. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. I saved my first life as an attending surgeon on a Tuesday morning in September. A 3-year-old girl named Emma, the same name as my best friend, came in with a complex congenital heart defect that required a 12-hour surgery to repair. When I finally emerged from the operating room and told her parents that their daughter would live a normal, healthy life, they broke down crying with relief and gratitude. Standing in that hospital hallway, still in my surgical scrubs, watching these parents hold each other and thank me for saving their child's life, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Every sleepless night in medical school, every exhausting shift during residency, every sacrifice I'd made, it had all led to this. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. For 2 years, I threw myself completely into my work. I performed increasingly complex surgeries, built a reputation as one of the most skilled pediatric cardiac surgeons in the Midwest, and started developing innovative techniques that were being adopted by other programs. I bought a beautiful condo in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I furnished it carefully, choosing pieces that reflected the life I'd built for myself. Sophisticated, comfortable, earned through my own hard work. My relationship with Emma and her parents had remained strong throughout medical school and residency. They visited me in Chicago, celebrated my achievements, and had become the closest thing to family I had. Dr. and Mrs. Peterson had been repaid in full for their investment in my education, but they continued to be proud supporters of my career. "We always knew you'd be extraordinary," Mrs. Peterson told me during one of their visits. "But seeing what you've accomplished, the lives you're saving, it's beyond what we ever imagined." Meanwhile, I had no contact with my biological family. I'd heard through small-town gossip that my parents were struggling financially, that Dad had been laid off from the plant, that Mom was working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Mia and her husband were still living in their basement with their 3 children, now in their early teens, none of the adults in the household maintaining steady employment. I felt sad about their situation, but not guilty. They'd made their choices, just as I'd made mine. It was during my 3rd year as an attending, when I was 38 years old and at the peak of my career, that my past caught up with me in the most unexpected way. I was finishing up a consultation in the cardiac ICU when one of our administrative staff approached me. "Dr. Williams, there are some people here who say they're your family. They don't have an appointment, but they're asking to see you. They say it's urgent." My heart started racing. I hadn't heard from my parents or sister in over 5 years. "What kind of urgent?" I asked. They mentioned something about medical bills and needing help. Should I have security escort them out? I should have said yes. Should have had them removed from the hospital and continued with my day. But curiosity got the better of me. "Put them in conference room B," I said. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I finished my consultation and walked slowly toward the conference room, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to encounter. Through the glass door, I could see 3 figures sitting at the table, my parents and Mia, all looking older and more worn than I remembered. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and he moved slowly, clearly dealing with some kind of health issue. Mom looked exhausted, her face lined with stress and worry. Mia appeared to have aged more than the 5 years since I'd last seen her. She looked tired and overwhelmed, her once perfect appearance now showing the strain of raising 3 young children. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Sarah," Mom said, standing up immediately. "Oh my God, look at you!" I remained standing near the door, still wearing my surgical scrubs and white coat. "What are you doing here?" "We've been trying to reach you," Dad said, his voice weaker than I remembered. "We hired someone to find your contact information, but you'd changed everything. Maybe there was a reason for that." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart, we need to talk to you. We need your help." "Help with what?" Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I had a heart attack 6 months ago, a bad one. I needed emergency surgery and there have been complications. The medical bills are—" He paused, looking embarrassed. "They're destroying us. We're going to lose the house," Mom added quickly. "Everything we've worked for our entire lives. We thought maybe, since you're a doctor now, since you're doing so well, you thought I'd pay your medical bills. Your family, Sarah," Mia spoke up for the first time. "Family helps each other." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was 34 years old, still living with our parents, still depending on them for housing and support while raising 3 children with a husband who couldn't keep steady work. "Family helps each other," I repeated slowly. "That's interesting. We know we haven't been in touch lately," Mom continued, "but that doesn't change the fact that we're your family. We raised you, we loved you, we gave you everything we could." "Everything you could," I said, still standing by the door. "Let me ask you something. Do you remember why we stopped speaking?" They exchanged glances, the same wordless communication I remembered from my childhood. "There were some disagreements," Dad said vaguely. "But that's all in the past now." "Disagreements. Is that what we're calling it?" I moved closer to the table but didn't sit down. "Do you remember Harvard Medical School?" The room got very quiet. "Do you remember me getting accepted to one of the most prestigious medical programs in the world and asking for your help to make it possible?" Mom shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah, that was so long ago. 16 years ago. I needed $25,000 to start medical school. Do you remember what you told me?" "We told you we couldn't afford it," Dad said quietly. "Right. You couldn't afford $25,000 for my medical education. But do you remember what you could afford?" Silence. "Mia's trip to Lollapalooza, $8,000 for a music festival." Mia looked confused. "What does that have to do with anything? That was totally different." "Different how?" "It just was. That was about me needing experiences and figuring out my life. Your thing was just school." I stared at her. Even now, 16 years later, she still didn't understand. "My thing was just school," I repeated. "Medical school at Harvard. Just school." I walked over to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Let me tell you what happened after you chose to invest in Mia's entertainment instead of my education." I turned back to face them. "I had to borrow that $25,000 from Emma's family, people who weren't related to me but believed in my potential more than you did." "We always believed in you," Mom protested. "No, you didn't. If you'd believed in me, you would have found a way to help me. Instead, you told me I'd figure it out. Because I always did." I sat down across from them, finally ready to have this conversation. "So, I figured it out. I worked 3 jobs during medical school while carrying a full course load. I lived on ramen noodles and slept 4 hours a night for 4 years. I studied until my eyes burned while Mia posted photos of her adventures on social media. Adventures you funded. Dad looked ashamed. We didn't realize. You didn't want to realize. It was easier to assume I was fine than to acknowledge that your favoritism was hurting me. I leaned back in my chair. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School. I completed one of the most competitive surgical residencies in the country. I did a fellowship in pediatric cardiac surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. I'm now one of the leading pediatric cardiac surgeons in the Midwest. Their eyes widened as I listed my achievements. I save children's lives for a living. Last week, I performed surgery on a 2-year-old with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition that's fatal without intervention. That little girl is going home to her family because of skills I developed through the education you refused to support. We're so proud of you, Mom whispered. Are you? Because you've never once asked about my career. You've never celebrated my achievements. You've never shown any interest in the work I do. I stood up and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room, pulling out a medical journal. This is the Journal of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery. See this article? I pointed to a paper with my name as lead author. I developed a new technique for repairing certain congenital heart defects. It's being used in children's hospitals around the world now, saving lives and improving outcomes for kids who might not have had a chance otherwise. I set the journal on the table in front of them. This is what your $15,000 could have contributed to. Instead, you chose a music festival. The room was silent except for the sound of Mom crying softly. Sarah, Dad said finally, we know we made mistakes. We know we should have supported you better. But we're family. Doesn't that count for something? I thought about his question seriously. You know what I learned about family during medical school? I learned that family isn't just about biology. It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about investing in each other's dreams and celebrating each other's successes. I pointed toward the door. Emma's parents became my family when they chose to invest in my future. My colleagues became my family when they mentored me and supported my career. My patients' families become part of my extended family when they trust me with their children's lives. But we're your real family, Mia said desperately. No, you're not. You're the people who gave birth to me and raised me. But you were never truly my family in the ways that matter. I sat back down, looking at each of them. Do you want to know what I make as a pediatric cardiac surgeon? They nodded eagerly. My annual salary is $450,000. Last year, I made an additional $100,000 from consulting and speaking engagements. Dad's eyes lit up, the same expression I'd seen when he talked about Mia's needs over the years. The $25,000 you refused to give me? I now make that much in 3 weeks. I let that sink in. The $8,000 you spent on Lollapalooza? That's what I spend on a weekend vacation. I leaned forward. Every month, I put away more money in savings than you make in a year. I own a condo worth $800,000. I drive a car that costs more than most people's houses. I have investments, retirement accounts, and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. That's wonderful, Mom said hopefully. You've done so well for yourself. I have. And I did it entirely without your support. In fact, I did it despite your lack of support. I stood up again. Now you want my help with Dad's medical bills. You want me to use the money I earned through the career you refuse to invest in to solve problems you can't handle yourselves. We're desperate, Sarah, Mom pleaded. We'll lose everything. And I'm supposed to care about that because we're your parents, Dad said, his voice rising. Because we raised you and loved you. Did you love me? Or did you love the idea of having a daughter who didn't cause problems, who got good grades, who made you look good without requiring any real investment from you? I walked toward the door. You want to talk about love? Let me tell you about love. Emma's parents loved me enough to invest their money in my future when you wouldn't. They loved me enough to attend my medical school graduation when you barely seemed interested. They loved me enough to celebrate my achievements and support my dreams. I turned the door handle. That's what real love looks like. Not biology, not obligation, but choice. They chose to love me and support me when you chose convenience over investment. Sarah, please. Mom was crying harder now. Don't do this to us. Don't abandon your family when we need you most. I'm not abandoning you. You abandoned me 15 years ago when you chose Mia's entertainment over my future. I'm just finally accepting the choice you made. We were wrong, Dad admitted. We should have helped you with medical school. We should have recognized your potential and supported your dreams. We're sorry. I appreciate the apology. I really do. But saying you're sorry doesn't undo 15 years of consequences. I opened the door. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my hospital and never come back. You're not going to contact me at home or at work. You're not going to show up in my life again expecting me to solve problems you created. But the medical bills, Mom said desperately. Figure it out. You told me I'd figure out how to pay for medical school. And I did. Now you can figure out how to handle your own financial problems. It's not the same thing, Mia protested. You're right, it's not the same thing. When I needed help, I was 18 years old, asking for support to pursue my life's calling and contribute something meaningful to the world. You're adults asking for money to fix problems caused by your own poor life choices. I stepped into the hallway. The $15,000 you wouldn't invest in my future has turned into a lifetime of success that you'll never benefit from. The $8,000 you spent on a music festival bought you a weekend of fun and 15 years of regret. I started to walk away, then turned back one final time. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that your daughter became everything you said she would become without your help. I want you to remember that the smart, capable girl who would figured out how to build a life that doesn't include you. Sarah, Mom called after me. Please, we love you. I stopped and looked back at her. If you loved me, you would have invested in my dreams when it mattered. If you loved me, you wouldn't have waited until you needed something to track me down. If you loved me, you would have celebrated my success instead of ignoring it until it became useful to you. I pulled out my phone and showed them my screen. This is my calendar for this week. On Tuesday, I'm performing surgery on a 6-year-old with a complex heart defect. On Wednesday, I'm consulting on a case from Mayo Clinic. On Thursday, I'm giving a presentation at a medical conference about innovative surgical techniques. On Friday, I'm operating on twins who were born with conjoined hearts. I put my phone away. This is the life you chose not to be part of. These are the achievements you chose not to celebrate. This is the future you decided wasn't worth a $15,000 investment. I turned and walked toward the elevator. Goodbye. Don't contact me again. As the elevator doors closed, I could hear Mom calling my name. But I didn't look back. That evening, I sat in my condo overlooking Lake Michigan, processing what had happened. I felt sad but not guilty, hurt but not responsible, angry but also relieved. For 15 years, I'd wondered if I'd been too harsh in cutting off contact with my family. I'd wondered if I should have tried harder to maintain relationships, if I'd been too unforgiving of their mistakes. But seeing them again, hearing them reduce my medical school acceptance to just school and my need for educational support to just money, confirmed everything I'd realized as an 18-year-old. They had never truly understood or valued who I was or what I was capable of becoming. They hadn't come to reconnect with me or celebrate my success. They'd come because they needed something, because their own poor choices had caught up with them, and they thought my success could solve their problems. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted help with medical bills from the daughter whose medical education they'd refused to support. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out at the city lights reflecting on the lake. Tomorrow I would go back to work, back to saving lives and advancing medical knowledge. I would continue building the extraordinary life I'd created through my own determination and the support of people who had chosen to believe in me. My parents had made their choice 15 years ago, when they decided that Mia's temporary happiness was more important than my permanent future. Now they would have to live with the consequences of that choice, just as I had lived with the consequences of pursuing my dreams without their support. The difference was that my consequences had led to success, fulfillment, and the ability to make a meaningful difference in the world. Theirs had led to financial ruin and the desperate need to ask for help from the daughter they'd never truly invested in. As I sat there that night, I realized that the best revenge isn't causing someone else pain. It's living so well without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. It's becoming everything they said you could become, achieving everything they wouldn't help you reach, and finding happiness and success in places they never thought to look. I am Dr. Sarah Williams, one of the leading pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. I save children's lives, advance medical knowledge, and make a difference in the world every single day. And I did it all without them. 3 months later, I received a letter in the mail, not at the hospital, but at my home address, which meant they'd hired another investigator to find me. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from Mom, written in her familiar handwriting on drugstore stationery. Dear Sarah, I know you don't want to hear from us, but I had to try one more time. Your father died last Tuesday from complications related to his heart condition. We couldn't afford the follow-up care he needed, and his condition deteriorated rapidly. I'm not writing to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because I finally understand what we did to you all those years ago, and I needed you to know that. Going through your father's things, I found a newspaper clipping from when you graduated medical school. He'd kept it all these years, even though we never talked about your achievements. I also found the acceptance letter from Harvard that you showed us when you were 18. He'd kept that too. I think he was proud of you but didn't know how to show it. I think we were both so focused on Mia's immediate needs that we lost sight of your long-term potential. We thought you were so capable that you didn't need our help, not realizing that everyone needs support and encouragement, even the strongest people. I understand now that asking for your help with medical bills was wrong, not just because you said no, but because we only reached out when we needed something. We should have been part of your journey all along. We should have celebrated your successes and supported your dreams. You were right to cut us off. You were right to build a life without us. You deserved better parents than we were. I hope you're happy. I hope you know how proud we should have been of everything you've accomplished. And I hope someday you can forgive us. Not for our sake, but for yours. With love and regret, Mom. I read the letter twice, then set it on my kitchen counter and stared out at the lake. I felt sad about Dad's death. Sad for the relationship we'd never had. Sad for the conversations we'd never have. Sad for the wasted years and missed opportunities. But I didn't feel guilty. I'd offered them the chance to be part of my journey, and they'd chosen differently. The consequences of that choice were theirs to bear, not mine to fix. That weekend, I drove to Emma's parents' house, the people who had become my real family through choice rather than biology. "I'm sorry about your father," Mrs. Peterson said, hugging me tightly. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay, sad but okay. Do you want to talk about it?" We sat in their kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd offered to loan me money for medical school 15 years earlier. And I told them about my parents' visit to the hospital, about the letter, about Dad's death. "Do you have any regrets?" Dr. Peterson asked gently. I thought about his question seriously. I regret that they never knew who I really was. I regret that they never got to see the doctor I became, never got to understand the lives I save, never got to be proud of something truly meaningful. But do you regret cutting them off? No. I needed to protect myself and my future. I needed to build a life with people who valued me for who I was, not who they thought I should be. Mrs. Peterson squeezed my hand. "You made the right choice. It takes courage to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they're family." "The hardest part," I admitted, "is that I always hoped they'd change. I hoped they'd realize what they'd lost and try to rebuild our relationship properly. Instead, they only came back when they needed something. That tells you everything you need to know about their priorities," Dr. Peterson said. He was right. Even facing financial ruin, even losing Dad to a medical condition that might have been treatable with better care, they'd approached me as a solution to their problems rather than as a daughter they'd wronged and wanted to reconnect with. That evening, I wrote Mom a brief response. "I'm sorry for your loss and for the circumstances surrounding Dad's death. I hope you and Mia are able to find stability and peace. I appreciate your letter and your acknowledgement of what happened between us. It means something to me that you finally understand why I made the choices I did. I wish things could have been different. But I've built a good life with people who value and support me. I hope you can find the same. Take care, Sarah." I mailed the letter the next day, then blocked their new contact information and took steps to ensure they couldn't find me again. A year later, I was featured on the cover of Chicago Medicine magazine as Surgeon of the Year. The article detailed my innovations in pediatric cardiac surgery, my research contributions, and my track record of successful outcomes on cases other surgeons had deemed inoperable. Emma's parents framed the magazine cover and hung it in their living room, next to my medical school diploma and photos from my various achievements over the years. "This is our wall of Sarah," Mrs. Peterson told visitors with obvious pride. "Our daughter who saves lives." Looking at that wall, I realized something important. Family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, investment, and love demonstrated through actions rather than words. My biological parents had given me life, but Emma's parents had given me the tools to build a meaningful one. My colleagues had given me mentorship and opportunity. My patients' families had given me purpose and gratitude. These were my real family, the people who had chosen to be part of my journey, who had invested in my success, who had celebrated my achievements and supported me through challenges. The people who had seen my potential and believed in it, even when I was just an 18-year-old girl with big dreams and limited resources. I am Dr. Sarah Williams, and I save lives every day. But more than that, I am living proof that you can overcome any obstacle, achieve any dream, and build any life you envision for yourself, with or without the support of the people who are supposed to love you most. Sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is teaching you that you don't need them to become everything you're meant to be. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well without them, knowing that the investment they refuse to make has paid dividends they'll never see, created value they'll never benefit from, and built a legacy they'll never be part of. In the end, their choice to prioritize a music festival over my medical education didn't just cost them $15,000. It cost them a relationship with the daughter who became one of the most successful pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. That might be the most expensive music festival ticket ever purchased. But it was their choice to buy it. And I've spent 15 years proving that it was my choice to make sure they'd never benefit from the investment they refused to make in me.